you have this I listened to one of your keynotes, and you were talking about this concept of chaos, and
Mm,
I found it pretty interesting,
mm.
and I said I was going to ask you on the podcast, like, what on this concept of chaos, and in the way you talked about it. I mean, I watched that particular clip because, again, it wasn't a long clip. I think it was about
Yeah,
17 minutes or so. So I watched it a number of times.
yeah,
So, but for
yeah.
those who haven't heard that, what are you proposing with this concept of chaos?
So what I'm proposing or what I'm suggesting is that in my experience, creativity has always emerged, I referenced it earlier, has always emerged from environments which embrace certain tensions, right? And that homogeny in thought, it eliminates the need for creativity to emerge. So advertising agencies for time in memoriam have been diverse environments that have sought to bring diverse people into that environment. And I say that, in the broadest definition of that word, people who just see the world slightly differently. It's always been a place for agencies have always been the place for the people who couldn't find a home in any other environment because they just an inability to conform was just something that was so fundamental to who they were. So agencies have always been environments that have embraced certain tensions, and to a large extent embrace certain levels of conflict, and sought to to synthesize that with creativity being the output, right? So it's my fundamental belief. It's where these tensions collide within an agency that set the appropriate conditions for creativity. And I was once at a Design in Derby talk, and I think you may find it on YouTube, that Dan Wyden gave, and it's amazing how one processes with something that somebody said, because for as long as I can remember, I've been quoting Dan Wyden about something that he said. And when I went back and I rewatched the
Discovered
clip,
that he
I
didn't say
realized
that.
he didn't say that at all. All right, but certainly that's what I heard. But he said it far more articulately than I ever could. But what he did was he suggested a similar thing, and that may well have landed for me very specifically in that moment. Was that he said that he always felt that his agency was at its best when it was operating on the edge of chaos, like on the right side of it, but on the edge of chaos, when there was a bristle within the agency, when there was an energy that galvanized that entire environment, that was embracing of diverse thought, that was embracing of these tensions, and didn't seek to eliminate tensions out of their environment. And for me, the agencies that I've worked in, when they've produced their best work, has always been when there's that kind of energy within the environment. And I think that we too quickly, and tensions and chaos can be dimensionalized 1,000 different ways, right? I think that there are destructive manifestations of it, and there are constructive manifestations of it. I'm not suggesting embrace it as it manifests across all.
Absolutely.
Eliminate the ones that are toxic, eliminate the ones that are destructive, but also acknowledge that there's a double-edged sword to some that need to be synthesized and harnessed. And I believe that when you put enough of those kinds of people in the right room, the best solutions inevitably emerge. And some of the best pieces of work that I've ever been a part of have been born out of those kinds of environments and cultures. So I'm a big believer in it, a very big believer in it.
Yeah, I think in a very small way for me, like my experience with that has been just in terms of the personalities that, you bring onto the team. I remember at one time when I was leading an agency, we had, an art director by day and photographer by night.
Yeah.
We had an account director by day and a food blogger by night. We had a graphic designer by day and a music artist by night. We
Yeah.
had like it was this diverse,
Amazing.
like,
Brilliant. Yeah.
and I dare say that was very instrumental to some of the successes that we saw at the time within the market. So I by a long shot, I subscribe to this suggestion.
I love that. And I think, what I was mentioning earlier around having a narrowed view on the world, and particularly through social media platforms primarily, where the algorithms feed us more of what it thinks we need to see, or more that we've already seen. It we're it's creating these echo chambers, it's creating these bubbles where
Yeah,
our opinion
yeah,
is constantly being reinforced. So we're not being
yeah,
challenged. And
yeah,
I think that it's only when we're challenged, that we're forced, as uncomfortable as that is, and we're forced to think differently. Human nature is such that we enjoy comfort. We like a warm bath. We like a warm hug. We like things that feel like that. We like
yeah,
a
yeah,
workplace that is free of tension. We
yeah,
like for our opinion to be agreed with every single time. We like every
yeah,
idea we propose to be told that is the best idea they've ever heard. And that's awesome. But the problem
mm,
is, you're not going to be the agency that produces the best thinking and the best work, because that can only
absolutely,
emerge from
absolutely,
environments where there is challenge, where there is a certain where the issues are confronted, are debated, are torn apart into 1,000 different pieces and reassembled in ways that nobody entering that room could have ever imagined. Um,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I love your story about people who,
yeah,
even in themselves,
yeah,
bring different personas and bring different
absolutely,
diverse experiences into the room. So I
absolutely.
buy that 100%.
Absolutely. I wanted to also talk to you about, this collective of companies or expertise that you have within TBWA.
Mm,
And obviously same thing applies
mm,
to, companies who have similar structures, whether in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, whatever.
mm,
And my question was going to be, how do you foster a truly collaborative environment across these
mm,
companies? And the reason I'm
mm,
asking, for example, is when you get a brief that clearly
mm,
requires this roster of skill sets
mm,
that are
mm,
distributed across these companies, how do you
mm.
drive that collaboration? And this is one of those questions where I'd really like, like sort of like practical ways, because it's not the first time you would have agency groups or collective or networks,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I feel like sometimes that structure only exists on the presentation decks, you get what I mean?
Mm,
And when it comes to actual execution on a campaign or a project on a brief,
mm,
it's not
mm,
as seamless as
mm,
sometimes it's intended to be. So I wanted to hear
mm.
from you. How have you been able to, truly galvanize every company or expertise within your collective, especially when it has to cater to a specific client or brief?
Sure. Sure. I mean, I suppose just firstly, the big disclaimer is that nothing I'm going to tell you is rocket science, and
Absolutely.
nothing I'm going to tell you is probably going to be a massive revelation, as so little in our industry truly is. Right. I think, as I said, so many fundamentals, the fundamentals that have been in place forever are the fundamentals that are applied today.
Yeah.
So for us, I suppose it comes from two things. Um, Firstly, if I look at our global organization as TBWA worldwide, we have a fundamental belief in the power of the collective. So and words are important, right? Because words determine understanding, and understanding determines how people engage with that thought, and how they navigate themselves and their businesses. And this idea of collective is that we are part of something bigger, but we're not necessarily beholden to it. We're all equal contributors to this organization. And as I mentioned to you off camera, Troy had always spoken about TBWA is not about New York out; it's about the world in. right? And that we are a collective of entrepreneur-driven agencies founded on a principle of what disruption is, governed by a set of behaviors that inform how we navigate the world. So culturally, that is very central to our global philosophy. Locally, what that means for us practically, and this is where it really is no rocket science, is you have to get everybody to believe in it. Yeah, everybody has to buy into it. Collaboration is about wanting to collaborate. People have to want to do it or not, right? And if they don't, then it's simply not going to work. You can force people into the same room, but you can't force them to engage meaningfully with each other in a way that is hopefully constructive. Right. So for us, one of the bedrock, first and foremost, has been to establish a common set of values and a common sense of identity of what it means to be part of TBWA. So that was the first thing. The second thing was for everybody to understand where we previously come from a set of companies within a group in South Africa that oftentimes were set up against each other, and a very strong sense of feudalism existed between these teams, was for everybody to realize that their individual successes that related to themselves personally or to the agency that they were leading or the team that they were leading was inextricably linked to the collective success, right? So eliminate this idea that I can only succeed if somebody else fails. This idea that I will succeed if they succeed. They will succeed if I succeed. Is a far more virtuous energy within the organization. And then practically after that is to shine a light on and celebrate the behaviors that are required in order to create that in order to foster that, I suppose, a more sustainable energy within the organization. So where somebody is manifesting those behaviors, call it out. Say, look at this. Shine a light on it. Shine a light on successes. Create the use cases that create the belief that what you're doing can only be, that what we hope to achieve can only be achieved if we're doing it together. And I think what that does is it eliminates a sense of self in terms of the responsibility I have for my own business, and it suggests that you are able to impact more broadly and you're able to enable somebody else's success. And imagine if we had an organization of 550 people working to enable your success, how successful you would be. Right. So that's, I suppose, those are the more philosophical, the more philosophical approach to how we've managed to do it. And then obviously that needs to be supported by financial and commercial frameworks that both enable the individual agencies to go off and succeed, but to ensure that I suppose the requisite reward and incentive exists across the entire organization. You can't operate on philosophy and principle alone, but not support that with infrastructure that enables that, right? So we've worked really, really hard to create that kind of infrastructure and to ensure that we really live this idea of collective in South Africa. And also to go, you know what, it's okay for us to be a little different. It's okay for Grid to be a little different to Huntler Scars. It's okay for TBWA, our Durban office, to be a little different from Huntler Scars. It's okay for Magna Carta to be its own version of TBWA. We don't, as I said earlier, homogeny is it doesn't create the conditions for creativity. So why must I seek to create homogeny in my own organization?
Exactly.
We allow the leaders to imprint their own distinct approach to leadership on their teams, as long as it's aligned to our core set of values, as long as it's aligned to our broader purpose as an organization. Bring yourself, man. Bring your unique leadership style. It's the only way we'll attract the best leaders into our organization and bring fulfillment. There's a reason why the best entrepreneurs who start agencies and sell their agencies get the hell out as soon as the earnout is either achieved or it's very clear that the earnout is not going to be achieved. right?
Right.
But TBWA is an environment which has somehow managed to keep the entrepreneurs locked into their agencies, and not locked in with handcuffs, but like they're there because we create the conditions that they still find fulfillment in their daily endeavors. And I think that it's that duality that we
Yeah.
work really, 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 really hard to maintain. And I think that has been party to some of our success in our ability to integrate these diverse companies and disciplines. Does that mean that it's like it's done and it's easy and we've cracked
Of
the
course,
code?
of
Like, no,
course.
it requires
Yeah.
constant effort. Much
Yeah.
like any relationship, because that's what this thing is. It's a relationship between individuals. Whether you're in your relationship in your personal life with a parent or with a sibling or with a loved one, we know that these things require ongoing effort. It requires constant finger on the pulse of where that relationship is at and what behaviors need to adjust in order to maintain a healthy sense of symbiosis between
Right.
these two entities, and that symbiosis has to exist within our organization too, as it is a living. We don't have machines that print something. We don't have machines that we don't produce a product where the human experience is not a fundamental part of. We are owning a business of 550 to 600 people, and that in and of itself creates a living organization, a living organism, and I think it needs to be treated as such.
When I think about client and agency partnerships, and I say partnerships intentionally because of the question I'm about to ask. When I look at whether it's Joe Public and NetBank, or when I look at what you guys have done with MTN before they moved on to the new partner, what I find really exciting is that what would you say were the core elements that drove or that drives such a remarkable partnership between the client and the agency? Because I think the experience is very, very different for a lot of people, if you get what I mean. Like, some people leave agencies because of a certain client. Clients leave agencies because that meme, what I ordered and what I got, situation. So for you, and just kind of using that case study, you don't have to. What do you think really drives those types of really remarkable client agency partnerships?
I think for me, in my sort of humble experience, and I've been very lucky to work across some incredible relationships. I mean, you mentioned the MTN one, but during my time at Ogilvy, South African breweries and Ogilvy had worked together for over 50 years at that point in time. Volkswagen and Ogilvy, 40 plus years. I'm very lucky within the world of TBWA that City Lodge has been a very long-standing client. Spa has been a client for 53 years this year, which is truly, truly remarkable.
Wow.
For me, it's always been about and it's going to sound sort of very cliched, but a deep sense of mutual respect. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is an acknowledgement of what each party brings to that partnership. I think that there has to be an acknowledgement and an appreciation for the respective roles in the partnership. And as I said, a respect for the perspective that each chooses to bring in. So again, back to that idea of diversity, that there are diverse skills, that hopefully a client comes to an agency because they feel that the agency is aligned on a common set of values. So their view on the world is common, yet they bring something which is not clearly and obviously apparent within that client organization. Right. So therefore the agency environment is additive. They bring something that is not obviously apparent, and then an embracing of that, right? And I think, as with any relationship, as we discussed sort of briefly earlier, a constant finger on the pulse of where the relationship is at, and a deep sense that no relationships will ever endure if they're neglected. No relationships will ever endure if they're taken for granted and they just assume the other partner will just be there next year because they've always been there. So there is this, once upon a time, you used to speak about, wanting to create sort of we're not a one-night stand agency, we're the marriage agency, right? Don't come to us for sort of a hot and sexy night and then expect, the next day we walk away from each other. But let's build something that is meaningful and that is unique. But that doesn't preclude that you have to work to keep it hot and sexy, right? I think that requires effort from both. And I think the client has to acknowledge that they need to take some responsibility for keeping this relationship vital in the sense of like the blood flow is positive. And the agency needs to acknowledge beyond just optics that they need to be doing their part to create a sense of vitality in that relationship. So I think if one can get those few ingredients and behaviors right, no relationship should fall down. And of course, many relationships often do for a whole host of reasons. And sometimes, again, to the reference to season, reason, lifetime, not all relationships are meant to endure forever. And that's okay, right? We have to be okay with that. And we have to be okay with the fact that some relationships, despite all the effort, run their course. And we have to be all right with that, and we have to be good to move on. I think that's a very adult and a very grown-up way of seeing sort of how client agency partnership should exist. And again, my frame of reference is always a personal one. Just apply the stuff that we've learned through our lives as human beings, right? Navigating life and navigating work, and apply some of those basic principles. And I think more often than not, you'll fall on the right side of things.